So this is a piece of deadfall. It's blown down. It's a very nice tree to harvest because the wood will be fairly dry. The only downside is the branches are fairly thick. They're very close together, so they're going to be fairly difficult to cut with a blade like the Magnum Kukri Machete. But we'll give it a shot and see how it goes. So all I've done is take off the limbs off the bottom part of this tree. I started the bucket in half. That's about 30 chops into the wood. Then this bottom part would fall down, the top part would fall down, make it much easier. I'd cut the top off up there and then process the rest of the tree. The problem is, even after this little tiny bit of work, you can see that the edge is significantly degraded. And again, the wood is not being properly cut, it's being smashed. So here and here you can very clearly see. As opposed to, if you look at the first few cuts, you can see they were much smoother. And if you look at the cuts on the limbs, the very first cuts, they were much smoother. And you don't see any of that breaking. So initially it was cutting very smooth on all the limbs. Now some of the limbs were breaking. As you can see, that broke off again up by the top, but that's just because it's cold out. It's below the freezing point today, so the wood is a bit cold. But that's a very different effect than what's seeing here with this spalling, because again, the wood is just not being cut cleanly. And you can feel it, and if I look at the edge straight into it, it's hard to pick it up on the camera, but I can see the edge actually reflecting light, and it's not. I mean, if you do the 3-finger test of sharpness that Murray Carter advocates, this is not sharp at all. I mean, you're essentially, the way Murray Carter says, you put your 3 fingers on the edge, and if you go to try to move them, you can feel it's sharp. You can feel it. You don't need to actually move your fingers. But I mean, this is not sharp at all now. It's completely blunt. And again, I don't recommend you actually try to see if your knife is sharp by doing this, because if it is, you'll probably be in a bit of a problem. But this is again butter dull after a very minor amount of work. And it's because that the edge is burnt when they shape it. Now, I'm actually after removing a fair amount of steel from this, because the last time that I used it, I was a bit disappointed I couldn't even do a dozen chops. So I took a stone and I ground the edge completely flat, ground straight into the edge. Then I resharpened it again, hoping to get the quality steel. Now I did make an improvement. The last time it went butter dull in around 10 chops. This time it went butter dull probably in around 100 or so. So much bigger improvement, but still the edge has a long way to go. But as a quick update, even with this factory edge bevel, which is kind of quite steep, I still would have no problems processing this tree, bucking it in half, clearing all the limbs off, although it's much more suited for wood like this. And if you look in here, you can see this wood, all these low-lying branches are essentially very dry. They come off relatively easy. They're great to burn. Not the green ones like that, but the actual dead ones, because no light gets down here, so all the lower branches die. And if you look down at the ground, you can actually see where they're actually just falling off the trees anyway. So the Kukri Machete will work very well for that, and I'll actually take a video after I go in and clear this up a little bit and show you how well it works. But as I said, still very disappointed in the edge. The edge performance is still abysmal, and it doesn't even last long enough for me to do a simple task like this. So again, when I get home, I'll take the stone, I'll flatten the edge back again, I'll resharpen it again, and see if we can get back to quality steel. But a couple of comments on performance. It looks to be a fairly solid blade, and it looks to be better than the regular Kukri Machete for that type of work, limbing off those branches, because you'll just feel the benefit of the extra length of the 17-inch blade. And it's also not sticking and binding on this type of work, because you're cutting through in 1 or 2 hits anyway. So the thinner profile gets you that extra length without having the massive weight that would come in a much thicker blade, which could be a problem for some people. And I had no problem chewing through this. That's only about 30 hits, as I said, with an extremely blunt blade. So sharpened edge, I'd reduce that probably to around 20, and once I regrind and reprofile, that'll be somewhere between 10 and 15 hits to get to that thickness. And again, this is a very soft piece of wood, if that's not immediately obvious. Right? But still, it's nice and dry. The limbs are all very dry. This is excellent wood. And it was raining all day yesterday, which knocked off most of the snow. So the ground is still very wet. But the nice thing about wood like this is that it dries very fast in high winds. because it has a massive surface area and everything is nice and open. So you go into an area like this where the wind is rustling about and all these branches on the trees, they will be dry within a matter of hours after even a fairly decent rain, because the wind just blows it off them. And the bark tends to keep the wetness out of the inside of the wood. So, interesting so far. So I've gone ahead and cleared back some of the branches off the trees back there. Works very well for doing that type of work. Has enough length and have to clear off the smaller branches in just big sweeps. And the hooked part of the kukri down around here works really well for keeping the blade trapped in there and not letting it slide off the heavier branches. However, if you're not going to be able to cut through them cleanly in one hit, it's better to use up by the tip and let the blade sort of glance off it rather than come to a dead stop in the middle, which kind of has a lot of shock. So it worked really nicely for that. I would vastly prefer the Magnum over the regular Kukri Machete for work like that. The 17-inch blade makes it much faster, much greater reach. However, for the actual dedicated chopping, there's no comparison. The regular Kukri Machete just puts a very similar amount of power in the same package, so it's much more focused, a lot less vibration of the blade. This blade moves really, it's that blunt now, it's hard to get sticking, but this moves really easy because it's so long. The leverage is very high, stick, so it moves very easy. And when you see that when you're chopping, the blade moves around a bit. That vibration reduces cutting performance. So even though this blade is 17 inches and the other one is 13, you don't get nearly a great amount of more chopping power. This was another 100 chops. I really wasn't intending to cut through it, but I just figured why not? I'm out here anyway, let's just see what we can do. But at this point it's becoming really frustrating. If you look down into the cut, you can see the amount of damage that's being done to the wood because the edge is no longer sharp. And you can see how difficult it is. It'll no longer bite into the wood because it's actually rounded over completely at that point. So you can see it's just rounded over completely. It's not biting into the wood anymore, so it's doing a lot of this fracturing. I also found this nice old piece of deadfall, whacked through it with a couple of hits. This is great stuff for a lot of reasons. Works great on a fire because it absorbs the water, can keep a fire smoldering for a long time. When it's dry, it's great to burn, makes tinder, makes nice insulation, makes nice bedding material. And if you want to do a bear grills, you can rip this open. There's all kinds of bugs and larvae and stuff usually inside of it. You can normally push these over or kick them over, but when you do, they tend to splinter and crack for most of the whole length. If you cut them through, you can end up with a nice piece of wood anywhere from 6 to 12 feet long. That is absolutely great. You can just stick it on your shoulder and carry it back to camp rather than try to work with a great big splintery bunch of mess. Anyway, I'm going to finish this off now because I'm just rather curious how long it's going to take. So the total cut count was about 180. That's relatively abysmal performance for this type of wood with this weight and heft of a tool. I mean, anywhere from 15 to 25 would be sort of acceptable because again, this is a soft wood. 180 is just staggeringly showing how effective the sharpness has on this. And one other thing, if you look at this from the side, somebody with a critical eye might notice, Cliff, that's an awfully steep angle you're running right there. That's intentional. Because the blade is that blunt, if I work at a shallower angle, which generally you want to do to give you better cutting ability, it'll come right out of the wood. I've got to work extremely close, almost to perpendicular. I'm only at about 10 to 20 degrees, because if I go down any flatter, this just glances right off the wood. So I got to keep cutting like this and doing these little wedging chops. And that's, Jesus, go in. That's one of the reasons why the cut count was so high as well. Because I'm working on a notch that was only on angles of about 20 degrees. On this really soft wood, I should be in the 40 to 60 degree range, but I can't. I can't chop down like this angle, which normally would give me good penetration, because it will come out of the cut, because the blade is that blunt. So again, now I can take this tree here. What normally I would do is come up and cut the top off up there, then take the middle section, limit off, take the top section, limit off. I got 3 nice pieces of wood now that I can harvest. So, but this blade is now to the point where it's really not sharp. There's not a great deal more difference between using the spine to sort of crack off branches than using the edge to try to cut them.